the average here. Someone's about 16,000 feet or something like that. They just went down to the water. I was under 609, something still ahead of us. 9 o'clock position, it looked like an explosion of some sort, about maybe 6 miles out from my 9 o'clock position. Explosion 6 miles out at your 9 o'clock position. Thank you very much, sir. Contact New York approach 125.7. 257. TWA 800, set up. TWA 800, set up. TWA 800 in the center identity.
TWA is such a family that for a family to lose 53 members of its immediate family was devastating, not just for me, but for everybody in TWA. Everyone else, just, everyone. We just walked around kind of in shock, thinking, how could this happen? 53 of us are gone.
I was angry. I was angry because I felt betrayed by TWA. I was angry because my brother was gone. I was angry because I was finding out how many people that I knew, flight attendants, active, retired, were on that flight. I was just pretty angry. And I had firmly believed, I had seen that night a short clip of what appeared to be a missile on the radar screen on CNN heading towards the flight, so I firmly believed, and still do, that a missile took down that plane.
We like to think that in America, those who seek the truth will be respected, even honored. But in the case of TWA Flight 800, those who did were ignored, even reviled. This program will tell you why. To preserve its integrity, we use raw footage from various sources of varying quality. We thank you for your forbearance, and we thank those who, despite the costs, have never failed to seek the truth. On the evening of July 17, 1996 at 8:19 p.m., TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747, took off from Kennedy Airport bound for Paris. It headed east without incident in fair skies along the south coast of Long Island. About 8:30 p.m., Mike Wire, a mechanic, saw a streak of light rise up from behind the house and head south-southeast away from shore. At the same time, Dwight Brumley, a senior Navy NCO on board U.S. Air Flight 217, watched a streak of light rise up towards his plane before leveling off and heading north towards Long Island. Lisa Perry from her Fire Island deck and Paul Angelides from his on West Hampton both followed the southbound streak towards eastbound Flight 800, and then each saw the northbound streak rise off the horizon at the last moment. At 8:31, FAA radar operators saw an unknown object streak up and merge with Flight 800. This they reported to the highest authorities. At that same moment, FAA radar picked up something else unusual.
There was a ship directly beneath Flight 100 when it crashed. We know very little about this ship. The government tells us they have not been able to identify that ship, although the government says they didn't even notice it for 6 months into the investigation, although it was tracked by aircraft radar. We know it was traveling away from the scene rather than towards it. Didn't help in search and rescue. It was traveling very fast, and it was likely very large since, aircraft radar picked it up at a good, 15 miles, 20 miles.
This is highly suspicious. It breaks every rule in the book. I don't care whether you're a civilian sports fisherman, whether you're a warship, or whether you're a high-speed private yacht that came over here and took a shot. They ran from one of the greatest air disasters in history. You don't do that at sea.
At 8:31, Flight 800 exploded catastrophically, killing all 230 of the good souls aboard. All leads pointed in one direction, but for reasons still uncertain, no one in official Washington wanted to go there.
We're hoping that we're going to find some survivors at this time.
After the crash, thousands of workers made a great good faith effort to redeem the bodies and to retrieve the wreckage, but not everyone. Although empowered by Congress to take charge of such scenes, the National Transportation Safety Board failed to do so.
Justice Department came in, remember, with all those FBI agents, and one assistant U.S. attorney in New York tells the NTSB, shut up and sit down. When Title 49 gives Mr. Hall the authority to tell her to shut up and sit down.
According to the New York Times, senior NTSB officials were furious. In times past, they might have resisted. Not in 1996. 2 years prior, President Clinton harnessed this once proud agency when he named Jim Hall, an old Gore crony from Tennessee, chairman of the NTSB board. Hall's best qualification, said the Washington Post, was his driver's license. The FBI would not let the NTSB interview eyewitnesses, not even Major Fritz Meyer, an Air National Guard pilot who stared the explosion in its face from his helicopter above Long Island.
And lo and behold, the man who was the head of the team for the NTSB is Norm Wiedemeyer, an old squadron buddy of mine from HC-7 in Vietnam. And we shook hands. We hadn't seen each other for 30 years. And after the interview was over, when I told him essentially what I just told you, we walked out. And as we walked out together, you know, we were saying, well, what have you been doing? What have you been doing? And he said to me, he said, you know, he said, I've been trying for 6 months to get to see you and interview you. And I said, Norm, I'm in the phone book. Just pick up the bloody phone. And he said, the FBI forbade.
The FBI, however, showed curiously little interest in what key witnesses had to say.
I went to a trailer there, which was an FBI trailer. I knocked on the door, they opened the door, and I told them who I was and told them I wanted to give them a statement. They looked around for somebody. There were 5 of them standing there, and they would say, well, you do it, no, you do it, no, you do it, no, you do it, no, you do it. And finally they picked what appeared to me to be the junior man, and we went into the back room of the trailer where he took out a 2.5 by 3-inch little spiral notepad and a ballpoint pen, and he asked me my name and particularly my address, and I gave it to him. And then he said, what did you see? And I told him the entire story that I've just told you. He wrote nothing down, and when I finished in about five minutes, I said, do you have any questions? And he said no, and I left. Now that was my sole interview with the FBI.
1 month after the crash, the FBI ceased altogether. Not a single interview took place for nearly 2 months. Since then, the FBI has re-interviewed fewer than 2% of the witnesses. Why the lack of interest? As the world would soon learn, there was no physical evidence to back up testimony of a missile strike.
Different organizations within the government and outside the government who looked at the metal all came to the same conclusion that there was no physical evidence of a bomb or a missile warhead exploding.
It's clear from the physical evidence that neither a bomb nor a missile strike was the cause of the explosion aboard Flight 800.
State unequivocally, the safety board has found no evidence.
Physical evidence is almost always the key.
Only one problem. The authorities were slighting or suppressing talk of a missile long before the physical evidence was collected and reconstructed.
That was the part that bothered most everyone. It was within days that all of a sudden you heard nothing about missile.
Despite the witness testimony, the FBI favored a bomb. Prime evidence found that the device exploded in cabin of Flight 800, read a New York Times headline a month after the crash. The FBI lab had found traces of PETN, an explosive common to both missiles and bombs. But the FBI did not seem eager to learn more. Said the IAMAW, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, we feel that our expertise was unwelcome and not wanted by the FBI. The threats made during the first 2 weeks of the investigation were unwarranted and unforgettable. Was the FBI sincere about a bomb? An encounter with the FBI agent in charge led one family member to think otherwise.
And before everyone sat down at this corner conference table, Serge Kovaleski said, well, can't tell me it was anything other than a missile. And Jim Kallstrom said, you're right, but if you quote me, I'll deny it.
Right from the start, the NTSB argued for mechanical failure.
All of a sudden, you're hearing, it's TWA's fault, it's a mechanical. And we're thinking, well, how do they even know that? They don't have any, at that time, they didn't even have the mock-up put together, nothing. They had nothing. And all of a sudden, they're hearing mechanical, mechanical, mechanical.
Within months, the NTSB went on record favoring an explosion of fuel vapor in the center wing tank. The public debate now is between bomb and mechanical. This false dialectic troubled many inside the investigation. One of them, 747 manager Terry Stacy, shared his concerns with Jim Sanders.
Terry Stacy was identified as the one person not to bother even talking to about trying to get information on that. He was such a straight arrow, go by the rules kind of guy. That's exactly the kind of person I wanted. And here I was face to face with him. And what he told me over those hours was that, one, and it was the first thing out of his mouth, he says, I know there's a cover-up in progress.
We are certainly fortunate to live in a country where we have a free media and a free press.
The question is often asked, why doesn't anyone come forward with the truth? The answer is they try to. It's just that no one wants to hear it, not even the major media.
I'm treated as an oddball. I'm treated as a freak. I'm treated as someone who's overcome with grief, doesn't know what she's doing, trying to blame anyone except a mechanical.
To suppress dissent, the administration used not only the media, but the courts.
Terry Stacy began to feed me a series of documents that I analyzed. It had to do with the debris field. What falls off a plane first generally, and falls into the ocean is generally the first thing, second thing, third thing. That you can build a sequence of how the plane broke up, and it might give you an idea of what happened. Well, he gave me these documents, I analyzed them, and because I saw this trail going from right to left across that plane through the passenger cabin analysis. When I showed him this trail, he, for the first time, and this was at the end of November, it was at his house over in New Jersey, when he looked at that, he goes, my God, there's a reddish-orange residue trail right there. He said, I think it's the very same seats, row 17, 18, and 19. He says, the FBI back in early September took samples and have refused to share the analysis on those samples.
Terry Stacy knew the plane well. He had flown Flight 800 from Paris to New York just the day before the crash. Without prompting, he volunteered to take the next step.
When he found he couldn't scrape the residue off, he, as he testified in court, on his own volition, popped 2 small samples off, put them in a plastic bag, put them in his pocket, left the hangar, went down to FedEx, overnighted them to me, and that night called me and told me they were en route.
Stacy removed 2 samples out of a possible 1,000. Sanders had 1 sample tested in a California lab. The elements identified by the lab were consistent with residue from a solid fuel missile or warhead explosion. In March of '97, a California newspaper ran a front-page story on his research. This was no longer a polite debate about theories. A retired cop-turned-investigative reporter had uncovered hard evidence of a likely cover-up within the upper reaches of government. The FBI leaned on Liz Sanders and continued to harass her, even after her attorney told the Justice Department to cease and desist.
I was not about to give up a TWA employee and friend. So we both decided it's in everyone's best interest if I just disappear for a while. It was a very hard time to go through, to all of a sudden have such a full life. I enjoyed my job. I loved my job. Had a million things going on there, was looking forward to a wonderful career with TWA. And now I had nothing.
Despite Liz's sacrifice, she would spend 8 months in an Oregon trailer park. The FBI found its way to Stacy, came down on him hard, and arrested both Jim and Liz Sanders for conspiracy.
The day I was arrested was surreal. It's like you're outside watching this happen to somebody else. It was something I never thought would ever happen to just an innocent, normal person in America.
The FBI handcuffed Liz with her hands behind her back and dragged her through throngs of reporters, and never once did any reporter ever even think about writing a story in defense of the wife of a journalist. That was the low moment. I knew that we had no support whatsoever from major media. We were not going to get our story out.
Really, my main thought when this happened was, oh my gosh, my mother's going to see this on television. And that bothered me because she was going to get so worried.
Liz's crime? She introduced Jim to Terry Stacy. She and Jim were tried as thieves in a conspiracy to steal government property, a law written to ward off scavengers. The federal jury was not allowed to know that Jim Sanders was a reporter, let alone that he was pursuing evidence of a cover-up by the same government agencies prosecuting him and his wife. The Sanders were both convicted. Before sentencing, the NTSB's Jim Hall sent a letter to the judge. He wrote, "This is not a so-called victimless crime. These defendants have traumatized the families with the release of misinformation, the only plausible cause of which is commercial gain." Left unsaid was that this avowed champion of the free press had a vested interest in shutting Sanders' investigation down. As to the cause of the fuss, the missile residue, well, it was really just glue, or so said the feds. As usual, the media never bothered to ask for proof.
We have a very specific document that proves that what Jim Kallstrom of the FBI, Dr. Merritt Berkey, and the rest that were out there saying it's nothing but glue, it's nothing but glue, and we, the government, are saying it's nothing but glue because Charlie Bassett down at NASA independently confirmed it. Well, Charlie Bassett, when he found out that's what they were saying, he very courageously signed a notarized statement. And I'm paraphrasing what he said because it was 2 pages. I didn't test anything having to do with Sanders' residue being glue. In essence, he's saying they're lying.
The eyewitnesses continued to plead their case. To make the no physical evidence mantra stick, they had to be silenced. Enter the CIA. During a November 1997 press conference, the FBI shared the CIA's analysis with the world.
Using these eyewitness reports and radar tracking data, CIA analysts were able to reconstruct the approximate path of Flight 800 from the instant its recordings ended until it struck the water. The following sequence of events is based on that analysis. Just after the aircraft exploded, it pitched up abruptly and climbed several thousand feet from its last recorded altitude of about 13,800 feet to a maximum altitude of about 17,000 feet. This is consistent with information provided by NTSB investigators and Boeing engineers, who determined that
This explanation stunned the aviation world.
All of the pilots that I've spoken to think it's ridiculous.
They don't have one witness who saw that. They don't have one piece of physical evidence that indicates that.
When the nose left the aircraft, the center of gravity moved aft of the center of lift. Now you've got both parties of the teeter-totter on the same side pulling down and the center of lift pulling up. That torque would rotate the aircraft so fast that it would go through a stall in 2 or 3 seconds and would not have any opportunity to climb.
Once it goes beyond about 20 degrees nose up, it can't fly anymore because these wings are no longer into the wind. They can't produce lift. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's been in effect at least since Newton's time. It's called gravity, okay? This 333 tons are going to still, less the nose, are going to still be there. And everything there from the time the airplane quits flying is going down.
When that aircraft was hit, it immediately began falling. It fell like a stone. It came right out of the sky, from the first explosion to the second explosion to the third, possibly fourth, and the petrochemical explosion. It was going down. From the first moment of the first explosion, it was going down. It never climbed.
So the law of conservation of energy says that you use kinetic energy, and that's the speed you have already, and you convert that to altitude, but there's a price. The price you pay is you slow down. It's like when you ride a bike up a hill. At the top of the hill, you're going pretty slow. You know, you used your energy up. Well, the radar data showed the plane did not slow down. If it didn't slow down, it didn't climb. If it didn't climb, the witnesses didn't see the plane climb, they saw something else.
As to the manufacturers of the 747, consider their response to the CIA animation. Boeing was not involved in the production of the video shown today, nor have we had the opportunity to obtain a copy or fully understand the data used to create it. The video's explanation of the eyewitness observations can be best assessed by the eyewitnesses themselves. How did those witnesses feel about the CIA animation?
That's what we call, or I call, a cartoon. It is totally ludicrous.
That bore no resemblance whatsoever to what I saw. Nobody said, is this what you saw? Did they show me the mug book? No. Because if they asked me, it didn't resemble it in any way.
When I first saw the CIA animation, I assumed that they had used it as a story just to pacify the general public, because it didn't represent what I had testified to the agent as to what I saw out here.
Mike Wire's denial is the most troubling, especially since the CIA based much of its analysis on his testimony. Said the CIA of Wire, in his original description, he thought he had seen a firework, and perhaps that firework had originated on the beach behind the house. But if Wire had seen something come up from behind the house, what he saw could not have been Flight 800. The CIA had to rewrite his story.
So they allegedly picked up the phone, did call the FBI. The FBI says it called Mike Wire, and that Mike Wire said, "Ah, boy, stupid me. I've been lying to you guys. I had a bad memory back then, but now I have a great memory now. Yeah, I didn't see it until it was about 20 degrees in the sky." And the FBI is alleged to have called this back in, and the CIA goes, "Oh my God, that's perfect. 20 degrees in the sky is exactly where Flight 800 met its demise, from ground up 20 degrees off the horizon." They never called.
They called me one time after the early interviews, but when I called back to respond to them, I got a publishing house in New York, and I just thought maybe it was some kind of newspaper reporters had got my name and were just out to get an interview, so I declined to call them back.
Here is how the CIA animation portrayed Mike Wire's altered testimony. Note how the ascent from the beach has disappeared.
A fourth eyewitness reported that he watched a white light, perhaps a firework, traveling upward at a steep angle with respect to the horizon. The light zigzagged as it rose, and at the apex of its travel arched over and disappeared. This observation lasted about 15 seconds. 2 or 3 seconds later, a fireball appeared in the sky near where the white light had disappeared. The eyewitness was able to specify a landmark over which the white light first appeared, a house near the beach, and a second house behind which the descending fireball disappeared. FBI investigators determined precisely where the eyewitness was standing and then measured the line of sight angle between the eyewitness and each of the two houses. Calculations based on the flight path of Flight 800 with respect to this eyewitness show that when the aircraft exploded, it was just passing over the house above which the white light first appeared. So the white light the eyewitness saw very likely was the aircraft briefly ascending and arching over after it exploded, rather than a missile attacking the aircraft.
The government never put him on Beach Lane Bridge. We put him on Beach Lane Bridge. It's okay, Mike. Using those houses, you show us where the initiating event occurred.
Here is what Mike Wire actually saw.
And I saw what looked like cheap fireworks leaving the beach behind this flat-roofed house. Went out on an angle, and then it turned and went out to sea. Now, as it was flying, it wavered back and forth and up and down. And I thought it must be cheap fireworks because it didn't go like a fireworks would straight away. It kind of wavered as it was in flight. It had a white glow to it and like a white plume, little white plume behind it. Went out to sea and it arced over and then disappeared. And after it disappeared, then a big orange fireball erupted in the sky.
The CIA never talked to Mike Wire. In fact, the CIA talked to no eyewitnesses. The agency reached its startling conclusion after reviewing only about 12% of the FBI's summaries, many of these hasty and slapdash in the first place. At the NTSB, the job of discrediting eyewitnesses fell to Dr. David Mayer.
As you well know, the work of the board is conducted under the party process. So if we interview an eyewitness, we would form a group, and the group would interview the witness.
And who was
Please note the words if and would and the following clarification by Mayer's boss, Dr. Bernard Loeb.
In this particular case, some of these witnesses we did not get to because the FBI initially interviewed them, so that is a slight difference.
Some of the witnesses they did not get to? Of the 736 official witnesses, the NTSB did not interview a single civilian witness and talked to only a handful of military in 1997. Like the CIA, the NTSB had no apparent interest in hearing what the witnesses had to say.
Well, is it your conclusion that the witnesses said they saw a streak of light, didn't see a streak of light at all?
That's an important question, and
that's that gentleman. Let's leave him alone. But sir, if one more outburst, and we're going to ask you to be removed from the room.
I yelled out during the last hearing. I said, "Ask the eyewitnesses." They had someone, a representative from the National Transportation Safety Board, review the written summaries of FBI agents who interviewed witnesses years ago. You know. And then Chairman Hall was asking this person who read the notes of someone who interviewed someone a few years ago what that person he interviewed might have saw. You know, why didn't they call the person? Why didn't they call the witness? I don't know.
Many of the witnesses submitted drawings to the FBI chilling enough to impress even Dr. Mayer, like this one.
Witness 649 described events that certainly do sound like a missile attacking the airplane.
Dr. Mayer dismissed 649's testimony for one reason only.
He said that everything he saw occurred between these two flagpoles. His location is up there marked school. He was actually exercising at a high school in the area. So again, it doesn't appear that this witness was looking in the right location to see Flight 800 at the spot where it would have been when it would have been struck by a hypothetical missile. So
one problem. In none of the FBI notes does witness 649 ever mention a flagpole, let alone two flagpoles. In his line of sight seen here, there weren't any. Late in the investigation, the NTSB staged a missile test.
As part of our study of witnesses, we conducted a missile visibility test. We did not conduct this test to determine if Flight 800 was struck by a missile. We've known for a long time that it wasn't. Instead, let's examine what a hypothetical missile attack would have looked like. The rocket motor of the missile would be visible, and it would look like a light ascending rapidly for about 8 seconds. Then the motor would burn out, and the light would disappear for as much as 7 seconds. After this, a second streak of light, the airplane in crippled flight would become visible. It would be different from the first streak, moving slower. Then it would develop into a fireball. We carefully reviewed the witness accounts to determine if anyone described a scenario like this, one that began with 2 sequential streaks of light and concluded with a fireball. We could not find anyone who was describing this scenario.
Witness 649 describes this very scenario. He reports seeing an object like a firework ascend fairly quick, then slow and wiggle, then speed up and disappear. Then he sees a second object that glimmered in the sky higher than the first, then a red dot move up to that object, then a puff of smoke, then another puff, then a firebox. Mike Wire, like many others, says much the same thing.
And as it went out, it left like a white smoke behind it, and it zigzagged and curved back and forth, and it made a little turn, and it arced over, and as it arced over, it disappeared. And then a few seconds later, a big fireball erupted out over the water.
Other witness drawings might have proved even more awkward to explain away, but fortunately for the NTSB, at least 30 of them have turned up missing. According to an NTSB exhibit, however, 96 witnesses report seeing the streak come off the horizon. 96. This did not deter the agency from creating its own animation, one that also showed a noseless plane ascending from a starting point 20 degrees above the horizon.
We've carefully studied and considered all of the witness accounts. The witness reports of a streak of light are consistent with them having observed Flight 800 in crippled flight. They're not consistent with a missile.
This is a depiction of what the NTSB's theory of the breakup sequence is. They got smart when the CIA got laughed out of town by aviators when they showed it climbing 3,000 feet. The NTSB said, well, maybe we'll get away with half of it. So they say it climbed 1,700 feet. You know, it didn't.
The eyewitnesses were not impressed either.
The group put in a full-page ad in the Washington Times, including 6 witness accounts. And what do you think about those accounts?
Well, I actually have the ad with me. I can, if you like, talk about very briefly about the witnesses that are mentioned.
Well, anybody wants to spend that much money to put a newspaper ad in, I'd sure like to have you go through it.
Well, the first witness who's listed in the advertisement was the witness who was on the bridge when he saw the accident. This is the witness that I described earlier in my presentation, and I told you that his account was consistent with the motion of the airplane in crippled flight.
The first witness was Mike Wyatt. He saw no such thing.
Around March of 2000, I found out that my story, my testimony had been used to create the video, and they never talked to me about it, so I didn't understand how they could use me.
The second witness in the ad is the witness who was on board U.S. Air Flight 217. I explained to you that he couldn't have seen a missile hit TWA Flight 800 because the timing just simply doesn't work out.
The second witness was Dwight Brumley, a 20-year military vet. He knows exactly what he saw and wonders why no one ever bothered to find out.
Despite my vantage point of being directly over the top of the explosion, a very unique vantage point, some level of expertise, understanding relative bearing, true bearing, motion, etc. Nobody with any aviation expertise ever contacted me.
The fourth witness who's listed in the advertisement said that he saw or in the advertisement it says he saw the accident from the deck of his house, seeing a glowing red object pick up speed and streak out to sea. Then he saw a series of flashes and a fireball, according to the ad. However, on July 21st, 1996, when the witness was interviewed, his FBI witness document says that he saw a red flare descending. It makes no mention of some of the other details. In fact, he was the first witness I used as an example in my presentation.
The fourth witness was Paul Angelides, a consulting engineer who frequently testifies in court.
And I gave them a sketch, and I had point 1, point 2, point 3. So I was showing the sequence and little hand sketches of what I saw in the sky in terms of the red phosphorescent object, its little smoke trail, its travel outbound, the cigar-shaped cloud, the fireball, the black smoke trail, and so on.
Angelides never said he saw only a flare descending, as Mayer claimed. Instead, he gave the FBI specific drawings of an object streaking out to sea.
See, the fifth witness that's mentioned in the advertisement is the pilot of the National Guard helicopter, who obviously I already described, that we studied radar data and calculated a time for his departure from out to the accident site from Gabreski Field, and said that he had seen a fireball in the breakup sequence of the airplane, not a missile.
The fifth witness was Vietnam combat vet Major Fritz Meyer.
Unguided, but it was definitely a rocket motor. And what I saw explode in the sky was definitely military ordnance. I have enough experience with it to know what it looks like. And I saw 1, 2, 3, 4 explosions before I saw the fireball. So the fuel in this aircraft eventually exploded, but the explosion of the fuel was the last event, not the initiating event. The initiating event was a high-velocity explosion, not fuel. It was ordnance.
Said FBI honcho Jim Kallstrom specifically about Major Meyer and these other key witnesses, "I have no idea why they say what they say. It's nonsense. It's stupid. It has no base in fact at all. Remember, the FBI interviewed Major Meyer for all of 5 minutes." As to the NTSB, there is some question whether even they believe in the ascending plane theory.
If you could show that the airplane did not climb after the nose departed, would that change your analysis?
No, sir, although we believe that the airplane climbed after the nose departed from the work that Dennis Kreider and others have done, it's actually not, our analysis is not actually dependent on this.
Now, is sound effect?
The question remains, why did these agencies champion a theory in which they themselves had little faith and in which no one else had any?
What troubles me most about what the government has been saying about this is their insistence that there is no physical evidence of a criminal act or a missile or an explosion of any kind other than a center wing tank explosion, and that's completely false.
Even by the standards of the Clinton administration, this was a troubled investigation in every detail. Let's start with the witnesses.
Normal board procedures were not followed on this investigation, and we are addressing that.
For the record, not a single eyewitness was allowed to testify at any NTSB hearing. The NTSB did not, however, shut out all alternative theories.
The meteorite, we got a lot of correspondence on meteorites.
And as you know, we had someone testify at the public hearing.
At the public hearing on the subject of the meteorite. The missile.
Problematic, too, was the initial FAA report of a missile strike seen on radar. In December '96, the NTSB leaned on FAA to make it go away. Wrote Bernie Loeb, NTSB Director of Aviation Safety, "I would appreciate it if you could verify that all specialists and/or managers agree that there is no evidence within the FAA ATC radar of a track that would suggest a high-speed target merged with TWA 800. But the FAA was not quick to roll over. Although we understand and share your desire to allay public concern over this issue, we cannot comply with your request. By alerting law enforcement agencies, air traffic control personnel simply did what was prudent at the time and reported what appeared to them to be a suspicious event. To do less would have been irresponsible." David Thomas, FAA Director of Accident Investigation. As to the radar data, there are problems here as well.
The last sweep of the Riverhead radar shows the 4 data points deleted in a pie wedge right where Flight 800 was. And that's where any missile would have been that was going to hit it. Now that data has been completely deleted. It's just like any investigation. When evidence comes up missing, there might be a reason, or it might have just been lost. But when you have data that it isn't just missing, it's just deleted, all the data. That's not something that just happens by itself.
And remember the explosive traces of PETN and RDX found inside the plane and out? Those also had to be explained away. About this, the NTSB proved coy.
We don't know exactly how the explosive residues got there, but we do know from the physical evidence I've just discussed that the residues were not the result of the detonation of a bomb.
All of this explosive residue is being found inside the plane, outside the plane. The government has a problem. So what they do is they say, oh no, there was a dog sniffing exercise in which the police officer was really reckless. He was just, residue was being scattered everywhere, and that must have been what it was. Well, the problem is, the plane that became Flight 800 was full of passengers waiting to go to Hawaii, full crew, during that entire time, for a long time before, and for a half hour afterwards. You can't do, and no one was aboard the plane at the time the dog sniffing exercise takes place. That's the way they do it. The next plane over was another 747, completely empty, no one on board. That's where the dog exercise took place. The government knows that. The FBI knows that. But they needed something to beat back this force that was building within the New York Times.
There were problems with the flight data recorder as well. Glenn Schultz, an expert in the field, made a compelling case to the top NTSB brass that the last 4 seconds were deleted. They promised to get back to him. Schultz is still waiting. The heart of the NTSB explosion scenario involves the center wing tank.
And that a fuel-air explosion with Jet A fuel was more than capable of generating the pressures needed to break apart the center wing tank and destroy the airplane. Together with the other physical evidence that I have already mentioned, this leads to the inescapable conclusion that the cause of the in-flight breakup of TWA Flight 800 was a fuel-air explosion in the center wing tank.
Despite its name, the center wing tank sits in the fuselage under the passenger seats. No one denies it blew up. The only questions are when and how. One serious problem with the NTSB thesis is that Jet A fuel is not inherently volatile. Retired Navy Wing Commander and flight investigator Bill Donaldson performed some simple but telling experiments on this point.
Really blew up, didn't it? What the Aviation Fuels Handbook says is that that same phenomena, putting out an open flame, will occur all the way up to 127 degrees Fahrenheit with Jet A1 fuel. And this is what the NTSB doesn't want you to know. Now, what I'm going to do here, it's windy, I'm going to try and light this candle. Then I'm going to use the spray bottle to show you what happens if something violent happened to the tank and that fuel that was in the bottom of the tank was suddenly misted into the atmosphere by kinetic energy. Okay, once again, we have an open flame, and now something violent happens to the tank on TWA Flight 800, and this is what happens.
In their own tests, the NTSB could not get kerosene to give any kind of an explosion that they could use for analysis purposes, so they had to go with hotter fuels that would explode.
There's never been an explosion of a fuel tank with the new jet-type fuel that we're using.
The second problem was that not even the NTSB could identify the spark that would ignite the fuel. Consider this damning conclusion at the final NTSB hearing.
The search for the probable ignition location was pushed to the limits of current technology. An accounting of the scientific uncertainties was meticulously maintained throughout the entire experimental, computational, and analytic processes. In the end, the uncertainties were too great to permit the identification of a probable location of ignition.
They spent $40 million trying to get some scientist somewhere in America to say it's theoretically possible that this hypothesis would work. They couldn't find it.
The IAMAW couldn't find anything either. We conclude that the existing wiring recovered from Flight 800 wreckage does not exhibit any evidence of improper maintenance or any malfunction that led to a spark or other discrepancy. So why did the fuel tank blow up? The IAMAW came to its own conclusions. A high-pressure event breached the fuselage, and the fuselage unzipped due to the event. The explosion was a result of this event. A high-pressure event is a technical way of suggesting an external force, like a missile. Let's take a moment to review the evidence. The Machinist Union argues for an external event. 736 eyewitnesses see what appears to be a missile. The missile tests support the witnesses. FAA radar picks up what appears to be a missile. The debris field suggests a missile. Explosive residue is found on the plane. Potential missile residue is found on the seatbacks. The flight data recorder appears to be missing the final 4 seconds. Forensic evidence has been withheld. The jet fuel isn't volatile enough. No ignition can be found. No comparable explosion has ever happened before. How then can the NTSB insist on a mechanical explanation? Simple enough. There was no, quote, physical evidence of a bomb or missile.
No missing portions of fuselage were large enough to represent the entry of a missile. You may have noticed that some of the photographs of the reconstruction show what appear to be several large missing areas. However, almost all of the fuselage structure in these areas is actually attached to the adjacent pieces, but has been folded back or crushed.
Something to remember here. The top NTSB brass were pushing a mechanical thesis before much of anything was recovered. It's time to ask a tough question. Is it possible that in an administration notorious for misplacing evidence, the physical evidence from Flight 800 was misplaced as well? Consider this exchange from early in the investigation.
I wish Clinton would get off his ass and do something about this terrorism. I don't know if you could print that. Oh no, it's definitely an explosion. I tell you, when you see it for yourself, I mean the little pieces are all over the place.
We have senior FBI agents under oath in court stating that the NTSB was never allowed to see anything as it came off the floor, onto the ships, onto shore, into the hangar. It remained under FBI control. The FBI would go through it at will, take anything they wanted, no record, and that again, that's also under oath, no record of this stuff being taken wherever the FBI wanted to take it.
This leading edge, one of the parties to the investigation, when the parts were coming in, said, aha, he sees it with holes in it. He takes the part himself to the chemical sniffer. They'd run the test. It pops positive. The FBI alerts on it, and the next thing you know, the part's gone.
Hank Hughes, senior NTSB official, under oath, May 10th, 1999, before a Senate subcommittee, told the Senate that multiple FBI agents were caught red-handed at 3 a.m. one morning stealing stuff from the hangar that he controlled. We know it because it's part of the Senate record.
As part of the discovery process for his criminal trial, Jim Sanders was allowed access to information and places others were not. He learned a good deal.
I have an extensive, just an incredible series of photos that show what the right side of that plane, the wing, the inner portion of the center wing tank, what it originally looked like when it came into the hangar. It was swept up into the air. By measurement, it had been blown all the way from the floor of that center wing tank all the way up into the passenger cabin. But they couldn't live with it because you must have an external force coming into the airplane, blowing it upwards and in. Now, that's not a mechanical, that's something from outside. So they cut off the upward bending metal, this huge, enormous piece, put it down into the bottom of the center wing tank and mashed it down so that instead of having been blown upwards, it was mashed down because a mechanical would have blown that same piece down instead of up.
V3 rotated forward, it impacted another stiffener.
Here, a senior investigator stands on the altered floor of the center wing tank, pointing up towards a tiny alleged sign of mechanical failure.
The aft side of the front spar just in front of this. After spanwise beam 3 separated across the top, pressure behind...
The next scene will show where his foot would have been had this piece not been altered, and how the pre-altered evidence confirms the path of a missile warhead blast. The circled area shows what an honest reconstruction of the center wing tank floor would have looked like. The investigator would have been standing about 7 feet above where we saw him. A missile warhead blast would have caused this. Someone altered the evidence.
That's a criminal act. It's a series of criminal acts. It's a conspiracy.
August 22nd, 2000, the day of the Sunshine hearing, I'm walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, and it came over me that this is the first time in my lifetime that I've mistrusted my government.
Whether the trigger was pulled by the United States or NATO or whether it was a terrorist act is irrelevant at this point. What is relevant is that the government knew. They knew who pulled the trigger, and they've lied about it and covered it up.
Let me present a likely scenario. Within hours of the crash, for reasons unknown, a decision was made at or near the top to contain any reports of a missile strike. To assure cooperation, participants may well have been told it was a matter of highest national security. Once made, this decision could not be taken back. Not in this White House, not in an election year. In small, awkward steps, it was likely decided that the evidence would be tailored to fit the safest political outcome, a mechanical failure. But a spontaneous explosion of this type and violence has never happened before, ever, and did not happen on July 17th. What did happen? Here is our best fact-based estimate. Yes, Flight 800 did take off from JFK at 8:19 and head east along the Long Island shore. About 12 minutes later, a boater sees a missile rise up off the horizon and loses it behind the beach house. Mike Wire, a few hundred yards to the east on Beach Lane Bridge, picks the missile up as it rises above that house and watches it head south away from shore, now zigzagging as it tries to acquire its target. Lisa Perry and Paul Angelides pick up this same missile now high in the sky. So does Air National Guard pilot Major Fritz Meyer. Meanwhile, Dwight Brumley, a senior Navy NCO on board U.S. Air Flight 217, watches a second missile rise up towards his plane, arc over and head to the north. An unidentified ship now boldly flees the scene, perhaps having launched that very missile. From a school parking lot on Long Island, witness 649 sees the same missile streak up vertically and then starts zigzagging in pursuit of its target. At 8:31, the southbound missile locks into its target and blasts into the underside of the nose. The northbound missile blasts into the belly of the plane just 9/10 of a second later. It is that first blast that blows the nose 15 degrees to the right and shoots debris a mile in the same direction. Eyewitnesses up and down the coast of Long Island watch helplessly as this tragedy unfolds in front of them. As to the ship, it never looks back. Lisa Perry sees it all.
And the other one comes up from underneath the bottom of the plane. It's in the shadow of the plane, and I think it's going to thread it like right through the middle of the head of the plane, and then it's going to thread it like a needle. And then the plane just stops. It's hanging in the sky, and it looks just like a toy hanging there just in the sky. And at that point it had been kind of flat. And then it goes down, and then I see along the spine of the plane, and then there's fractures right on the plane itself. There's just spaces on the plane. And then it explodes and it goes sideways.
It is this second missile that rips through the center wing tank and transforms the fuel into a volatile mist. Now noseless Flight 800 pitches backward and the fuel erupts, but this plane has nowhere to go but down.
About 2.5 seconds after that, further to the left, and again slightly lower, I saw what I'm not certain was either one or two nearly concentric, nearly coincidental explosions. Yellow light, ta-da! And from that point immediately emanated the fireball, the third explosion. The first two appeared to be high velocity. The last one was a low velocity petrochemical explosion, and it grew into this huge fireball, which then began to fall towards the ocean, moving to my left as it fell.
9 o'clock position, it looked like an explosion of some sort, about maybe 6 miles out from my 9 o'clock position. Explosion 6 miles out at your 9 o'clock position. Thank you very much, sir.
There is no 3,000-foot ascent to deceive the witnesses, nothing like it. TWA Flight 800 immediately begins its slow, oddly graceful descent into the sea, breaking up as it descends, transforming itself in those sad final seconds from a horror into a tragedy that will soon resonate in 1,000 scenes of intense personal sorrow throughout the world.
But the main thing that hit me then was anger and a promise. I said, "Who did this to you?" And that I would find out who did that to him.
There is no bringing these good folks back, but it is still possible to resurrect the truth, still possible to restore the rule of law, still possible to redeem the soul of a nation that very nearly lost it.